There seems to be a commonly held belief that massive changes in our lives are only created by large or dramatic actions, that an intense and short-lived burst of productivity, commitment, or hard work will fundamentally change who we are and therefore our lives. When viewed in this light, changing our situation can be a daunting task that borders on the impossible. We've lost before we even started. This is an idea that's perpetuated by movie montages of protagonists going through massive transformations in short periods of time. In reality, it's small changes to our habits that are implemented consistently that lead to major improvements. But how do we implement these habits? How many times have you tried to implement a new routine? It could be getting healthier, starting a side hustle, spending more time with your loved ones, and that new routine doesn't stick. Well, this is where Atomic Habits by James Clear comes in. In this video, I'm going to summarize some of the key learnings that I got from the book and try to break down how these ideas can be implemented in your life. But this video is no substitute for reading the book itself, so if these ideas seem interesting or helpful, I'd highly recommend getting yourself a copy. What are atomic habits? The idea behind the title is multi-layered. The word atomic gives the impression that these habits should be small, like atoms, which makes them easier to implement. But the true meaning behind the word is only apparent when you dive a little bit deeper. These tiny habits should build together into something larger and more significant, and therefore more impactful. As James Clear describes it, just as atoms are the building blocks of molecules, atomic habits are the building blocks of remarkable results. The first key idea is that small changes to our habits lead to massive transformations in our lives. Don't underestimate the power of small habits. We should be aiming to look for ways to get 1% better every day and set ourselves on a path to long-term improvements. These changes won't seem glorious or even noticeable, but they will have far more impact in the long run. This graph shows the compounding effect of 1% improvements. If you improve by 1% each day for a year, when December 31st rolls around, you'll be 37 times better than when you started. Contrastingly, if you get 1% worse each day, you'll have tumbled down to almost zero. Habits don't seem to make much difference in the moment, and this presents some challenges that we'll explore shortly, but they deliver a huge impact over the course of months and years. As with everything in this book, this can work to our benefit or to our detriment. Bad habits might not seem like a big problem in the short term. One chocolate bar won't show up on the scales tomorrow, and one afternoon wasted on your phone isn't a big deal. But if you zoom out, the problems become strikingly apparent. As James puts it, time magnifies the margin between success and failure. It will multiply whatever you feed it. Good habits make time your ally. Bad habits make time your enemy. The fact that good progress is invisible is something that we all need to be aware of. James describes this as the plateau of latent potential, and I think that this graph from the book is something to think about regularly when implementing a habit or learning a new skill. We tend to think that progress in any given field is linear, when in reality, the momentum required takes time, builds slowly, and is often barely noticeable. Eventually, it gets to a point where progress skyrockets due to this compounding effect of 1% improvements, but the gap between our perception of progress and the reality, which James labels the valley of disappointment, is where many people will give up on a new habit and slip into old routines. It feels like you're not making progress because the progress is delayed. So this illustrates that the key ingredients of any successful change are patience and consistency. Focus on establishing good systems rather than setting goals. Now, this one seems counterintuitive at first glance. It might seem obvious that in order to make a change in our lives, we need to have a clear goal of what we want to achieve. While James admits that setting goals is useful for setting a direction, he argues that they shouldn't be our main focus. The book outlines a few reasons why focusing on goals shouldn't be our main method of change. Firstly, everyone sets goals. If you take the example of an Olympic swimming final, you've got 8 athletes who all want to win the gold medal, but only one of them is going to win. It's not the goal that sets them apart. The goal is the same for each athlete. It's the systems that they've put in place around training, nutrition, and mindset that's going to determine the winner. Setting goals also creates a win-lose situation that can sabotage your results in the long run. You're either going to achieve a goal or you won't. It's black and white. If you set a goal and you don't achieve it, then you've failed. Even if you're making progress in the right direction, you won't recognize that progress, and you'll likely give up on any further progress, which is inevitable if you keep going. In addition, goals are temporary. Once you achieve them, then what? If you identify that you aren't good at saving money, and say, set the goal of saving $1,000, what happens when your bank account hits this magic number? you'll most likely fall back into the same habits that made you conclude that you needed to save in the first place. But if you focus on addressing your system of budgeting and finance, your changes will extend far beyond just saving $1,000. Goals are at odds with long-term progress. Take the example of someone who's trying to lose weight. If they're focused on the goal of losing 5 kilograms, once they hit that weight, what do? Drive to McDonald's and celebrate? Instead, the focus should be on establishing a system of living healthily, which will lead to real and permanent change. Change your identity. Don't focus on what you want to achieve, but on who you want to become. When implementing a change, most people focus on the outcome, and then establish a process to achieve that outcome. Then finally, if ever, this will lead to a change in their identity. This should be flipped. In order to change our habits at a systems level, the focus should be on changing how we view ourselves, our identity in relation to this new habit. As James puts it, the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation is when a habit becomes part of our identity. In the book, he gives an example of 2 people who are trying to give up smoking. When the first one is offered a cigarette, they say, "No thank you, I'm trying to quit." They're focused on the outcome, which is to quit smoking. Their process in this case is to say no to a cigarette, but ultimately, their choice of words indicate that they still identify as a smoker, one who's trying to quit. They haven't shifted their identity. The second person says, "No thanks, I don't smoke." In this case, the person has changed their identity first to someone who doesn't smoke. This leads to process change much more naturally. Someone who doesn't smoke is obviously going to say no to a cigarette, and this identity change will automatically lead to the outcome that they were looking for in the first place. He gives other examples. The goal isn't to read a book, it should be to become someone who reads. The goal isn't to run a marathon, it should be to become a runner. First, decide on the type of person you want to be, then prove it to yourself with small steps towards becoming that person. Who is the type of person that would make their partner feel valued? Who is the type of person that could start a new business? Ultimately, habits are simply the steps that you take to become the type of person you wish to be. If you see yourself as that person from the beginning, then your habits will follow naturally. The rest of the book goes on to explain how we can actually build better habits. Firstly, it's important to be aware of the habit loop, which includes 4 stages we can manipulate to build better habits that serve us and eliminate those which don't. These 4 elements are cue, craving, response, and reward. The cue triggers our brains to initiate any given behavior. The craving gives motivation to follow through and act. The response is the actual habit that is being built, and the reward is the end goal that will satisfy the initial craving and therefore teach us what actions to repeat in the future. An example from the book is cue, you smell a donut shop as you walk down the street near your office. Craving, you begin to crave a donut. Response, you buy the donut and eat it. Reward, you satisfy your craving to eat a donut. Buying a donut becomes associated with walking down the street near your office. Over time, rewards become linked with cues. So in this case, you would run the risk of buying a donut every time you smell one on your walk home from work. Eating a donut might then be a cue to skip the gym, and skipping the gym might be a cue for eating an unhealthy dinner. Habit loops can spiral out because the more you repeat them, the stronger and more automatic they become. The cues can be subtle, and they can trigger both positive and negative behaviors. Understanding this habit loop allows us to utilize the 4 laws of behavior change that make up the rest of the book. The first law is to make things obvious. The second is to make them attractive. The third, make them easy. And the fourth, make them satisfying. These laws can be inverted and used to break bad habits as well. Firstly, make bad habits invisible. Make them unattractive. Make them difficult. And make them unsatisfying. The first law is to make it obvious. In order to make it obvious, you first have to identify your current habits. You need to recognize them before you can change them or add new ones. The problem with habits is that they're automatic and often unnoticed. You can download a copy of the Habits Scorecard, link in the description, to identify each of your daily habits. You might be surprised by what you pick up. Once you're aware of your habits and you know what you want to change, the next step is to set implementation intentions. When setting new habits, be specific and clear. People who make specific plans for when and where they're going to perform a new habit are far more likely to follow through. Don't be vague and don't leave it to chance. The more specific the intention, the better. The formula that James gives is I will, behavior, at, time, in, location. For example, I will practice mindful breathing every morning in my living room. This process can be amplified by doing something that James calls habit stacking, where you look at the habits you already have and use them as a cue for new habits. This formula is after current habit, I will, new habit. An example, every morning after I eat breakfast, I will practice mindful breathing in my living room. In this way, habit stacking further increases the likelihood that you'll be consistent. You can use this to stack multiple habits together, and each one acts as a cue for the next. The next way of making it easy is to change your environment to make the cues of good habits obvious and those of bad habits invisible. For example, if you wanted to stretch in the morning, you would leave your yoga mat next to your bed, so it's the first thing you see when you wake up. Do you want to stop checking your phone while you're working? Leave it in another room, put it in a drawer, or just turn it off. This is also why you'll often hear the idea of assigning certain areas of your house for individual activities. In the past, I've had trouble being productive at my desk because I used to play video games on the same laptop where I did my work. After rearranging my setup and allocating specific areas to specific tasks, I'm far less likely to procrastinate by playing video games when I'm supposed to be working. The second law is to make it attractive. You can make habits irresistible by pairing good habits with rewards. In the book, James explains that it's the anticipation of a reward, not necessarily the fulfillment of it, that gets us to take action. Initially, when introducing a new habit, the dopamine spike in your brain is released when you get the reward. But once you've done them multiple times, the dopamine spike begins to be released early. So it becomes important to make sure that when you're receiving positive cues, you follow through with positive action, which will help reinforce new habits. A good example is thinking about children in the lead up to Christmas. The excitement builds up for weeks in anticipation of getting presents on Christmas Day. Similarly, the dopamine spike from buying a lottery ticket doesn't just happen as the numbers are being drawn, it builds up in the days prior. You can use this understanding of reward systems to combine an action you need to do with one that you want to do in a process that James calls temptation bundling. He gives a formula for habit stacking and temptation bundling, which is after current habit, I will, habit I need. After habit I need, I will, habit I want. Let's take my example from earlier. After I eat breakfast, the current habit, I will practice mindful breathing, the habit that I need. Then, after I practice mindful breathing, the thing I need, I will watch a jiu-jitsu video on YouTube, something that I want. The third law is to make it easy. Your goal should be to make habits automatic. Habit formation is the process in which a behavior becomes progressively more automatic through repetition. When you repeat an activity, your brain develops neural pathways to make you more efficient in completing that activity. Notice how the graph doesn't say time, it says repetitions. A common perspective might be that a habit builds over time. This isn't necessarily true. It's built up through the number of repetitions. This is an important distinction. Another thing to consider when making habits easy is that human behavior follows the law of least effort. People will fall into behaviors that don't require much work. So if you can reduce or eliminate any friction associated with behaviors, then the habit will develop more easily. Inversely, if you increase the friction associated with certain behaviors, they'll be difficult. Earlier, I spoke about setting up your environment to make cues more obvious. You can also set things up so that new habits fit into the current flow of your life more easily. The example from the book is that you're far more likely to go to the gym if you choose a gym that's located along your daily commute to work. Another way to make habits easy is to start small, which will help you to avoid procrastination. Starting too big can make the task too daunting to initiate. This can be an easy trap to fall into with good intentions. Excitement can take over, and this can lead to trying too much too soon. James gives the 2-minute rule to help alleviate this tendency. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do. Almost any action can be scaled down to an easy-to-implement 2-minute version. This table from the book shows us how different habits can be broken down into easier tasks that can be built up over time. The idea here is to start small and then scale it up. The fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. If an experience is satisfying, we're much more likely to want to repeat that experience. The first 3 laws that we've looked at are all about increasing the chances that we will perform a behavior the first time. And the fourth law, to make it satisfying, is all about increasing the chance that we will repeat the behavior again. James outlines the cardinal rule of behavior change, which is what is immediately rewarded is repeated, and what is immediately punished is avoided. When establishing new habits, it's important to give yourself a reward that is instant and visible. To get a habit to stick, you need to feel immediately successful, even if it's in a small way. If your goal is to stretch each morning, after you stretch, place a marble in a jar labeled completed stretches. A simpler version of this would be to mark off on a calendar or a diary or your phone each time you stretch. The little ping of the marble bouncing into the jar is your reward signal for completing the activity, as well as a way of tracking it. As you watch the marbles build up over time, you can see your progress towards making the habit more automatic. You can amplify your satisfaction by giving yourself a big reward once the jar is full. Then it just becomes about keeping the momentum going. You want to think of every iteration of a new habit as a link in a chain. The goal is to not break the chain. Get a streak going, and then try to keep your habit streak alive. If you miss a day, that's okay, but make sure you get back on track as quickly as possible. Never miss twice. This is when bad habits will start to compound. Ultimately, the goal is to make good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, and to make bad habits invisible, unattractive, hard, and unsatisfying. When written out like this, it sounds really easy, but we all know it's a much harder process than that. If you can implement just some of the suggestions in this video when trying to implement a New Year's resolution, the habit will be far more likely to stick and then become a permanent part of your routine. For me, the key takeaway from the book is that small habits compound over time, and that it doesn't take massive actions to have massive change in our lives. I hope you found the information in this video helpful, and if you'd like to learn more, be sure to grab yourself a copy of Atomic Habits by James Clear. My name is Toby Jennings. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please press that like button and consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. If you have any feedback or ideas, please give me a comment below. You can check out my latest video by clicking on this link here, and have a nice day.